Good evening, everyone. I, Smriti Girotra, Primary Coordinator, Euroschool Airoli, welcome you all to this Conclave of Young Minds, a webinar on World Population Day. We are happy to collaborate with Euroschool Thane, Euroschool North Campus, and Euroschool Whitefield. I welcome Principal North Campus, Dr. Vandana Gupta, Principal Thane, Ms. Jyotsna Mayadas, Principal Whitefield, Ms. Shruti Arun, and Principal Euroschool Airoli, Ms. Sudeshna Chatterjee to this world event. I also welcome Ms. Divya Prakash, CCA Coordinator, Euroschool North Campus, Amanpreet Garg, Academic Coordinator, Primary, Euroschool Whitefield, Ms. Katie Khotifar, Lead Teacher, Primary School, Euroschool Thane, Ms. Catherine Jacob, Student Senate in Charge, Primary, Euroschool Airoli, Ms. Sita Lakshmi Ramaswamy, in charge Cultural Department, Primary, Euroschool Airoli, Ms. Pia Lawrence, Lead Communications, Primary, Euroschool Whitefield, and Ms. Prima Rego, ICT Teacher, Senior and Cambridge, Euroschool Airoli. I also welcome all our junior and senior panelists and the lovely audience. We'd love to hear from you. For this, we have planned for a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. We'd love to get your reactions, so kindly share the same on the chat. A recording of this webinar will be available and shared with all of you. I would now like to invite Ms. Shruti Arun, Principal Whitefield, for the keynote address. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. A warm welcome once again to all of the panelists, our junior panelists, especially our senior panelists, and the audience, I'm sure, who have joined us probably from all 11 schools, Euro schools, and maybe even beyond. I'm not really here to throw light on this crackling topic for the day. There are student panelists as well as senior panelists who are experts and who will do so for us today. Coordinators and teachers have worked hard at it, and I'm sure it'll be a treat to watch. They've done a great job in spinning this into a promising experience for all of us. But I would like to set the context as to why this webinar. And what do we seek to achieve from it? It's designed to be a learning experience, of course, a rich one at that, to simply put. Let me also tell you how exactly so. It goes beyond just the obvious speaking skills, presentation, confidence building, and so on. Of course, it does all of that, but it does so much more. I think we do loads of activities to ensure these basic skills anyway in the classroom on a day-to-day basis. But what else does this webinar do? Other than throw light on the topic, which is an important one, a very contemporary one, an important one. However, what is more significant is that it teaches our students to think, not just the panelists, but also the audience, to think about this issue. And just to think is something that a lot of young people must learn to do today. There is so much clutter that tends to be in our lives that they may not be simply thinking enough. This class to go to, that to attend, this to learn, go out and play, video games. There's so much clutter. I'm not sure if our students are getting enough opportunity to think. So this webinar aims at that, to stop, to think deeply, and to also make connections, especially about powerful issues like this, which will have a bearing on their lives tomorrow. I think that's really important. Also to think and analyze, make your own construct of the topic in your mind, formulate, crystallize your thoughts, come up with an informed, well-researched perspective. And finally, present that perspective in a meaningful way, supported with data, facts, figures, and more importantly, reasoning. And I think this is a super important skill to have that will put them in good stead in future, in their life tomorrow, at college, in their careers, beyond, all of that. So that's one thing that I'd like to put forth. All of this is really at the level of the individual, but in a social context also, and especially when we are preparing our students to be leaders of tomorrow, there are two other significant skills in my mind. And one of those is collaboration. And students today who've never known each other earlier, all of our junior panelists, they're from 4 different schools as has been announced. And they're learning to do, learning to collaborate, right? They've also had the opportunity to see and model their teachers over the last few days or weeks, who have also collaborated across 4 different schools to put this whole thing together. So collaboration in team settings and just being a great team player, I think it's critical to one's success, and I'm sure you agree. The other skill that's beyond the individual setting after collaboration that I want to put forth here as being a critical one is to respect other perspectives different from their own. So look around you today. You see so much intolerance for perspectives that are different from one's own, right? We see that in the social media, in the newspaper, on television, Twitter. There's so much intolerance to somebody else's perspective that's different from yours. We simply seem to have forgotten to respect another person's opinion or perspective, learn from it all, and just learn to be tolerant of diverse views. We hope to be able to teach this as well as tomorrow's leaders. If they have to lead well, they need to be accepting of diverse views and also be tolerant and lead a variety of different and diverse people, right? As leaders, they'll have to lead. You can't really choose your team always. So you'll have to lead a variety of different diverse people with different backgrounds and beliefs. So that's, I think, another thing that we're hoping to teach our students through today's webinar. And why do we think it's important to do all of this? We have a brilliant overarching vision at Euroschool, and that is to empower every student to discover yourself, to empower you to discover yourself. These are 2 beautiful words, discover yourself. To enable students to discover themselves it's such a powerful guiding factor when we design our learning program at Euroschool. And it is exactly what keeps us going no matter what, pandemic or not. So come children, all of you on the panel and in the audience today, come forward, make best of all your opportunities and discover yourself. I think that's really so important. It's a great day today, and I wish all of you the very best. Thank you to the senior panelists for having joined us and made this opportunity possible. And with that setting of the context, I would like to hand over back to Smriti.
Thank you, ma'am. Today is just not another day for celebration, but it focuses on a serious concern. The central assumption is that overpopulation leads to a decline in the quality of life. This webinar is dedicated to finding solutions and conclusions to this vexed problem. Let us start the event with a short preview video. Thank you, Prima ma'am. Our first speaker for today is Miss Trisha Sawant, a grade 5 student from Euroschool Thane. Trisha is a passionate reader. She plays the keyboard and is a talented singer, having won many awards at various competitions. So Trisha, when we think of the word population, we think of a big number that is ticking fast. But there are various terms associated with this issue. Would you please share the various technical terms associated with human population?
Thank you, ma'am. To understand the various aspects of population and the information revealed by it, one must understand a few important terminologies used to express population. I think the most important aspect would be growth rate. Growth rate of population is the number of people added in a year to the previous year's number. It gives an insight of how the population in a certain area, such as a village, district, state, country, and at a global level, is growing with time. Currently, the population in the world is growing by 81 million people per year. I repeat, 81 million people per year. That is at a rate of around 1.05% per year. Population in a particular area grows mainly because of new births and migration of people from other areas. Now, one may wonder as to what is birth rate. It is simply a measure of the number of live births in a year. To be very specific, birth rate is measured as the number of live births per 1,000 people in a year. That naturally brings us to the third term, mortality rate or death rate. Similar to birth rate, this is also expressed as the number of deaths per 1,000 people in a year. For example, the death rate in India stands at 7.3 deaths per 1,000 population. When we analyze these two, birth as well as death rate, we can infer whether the population is growing or decreasing. If we look at India's case, 18.2 births and 7.3 deaths, it is self-explanatory, right? Increasing birth rate on one hand and a declining death rate on the other can be credited to better healthcare facilities and inventions in medical sciences. Over the years, cures have been found to several illnesses, thereby improving the life expectancy of people around the world, eventually ending up in world population growth. I would like to draw your attention now to a term called population distribution. Let me give a personal example here. Once, while visiting my native place Savantwadi, which is in Maharashtra, I noticed a big change in the number of people around. As we were moving away from the city, I could see fewer people walking on the streets of the smaller villages. It was clear in my mind that some areas like big cities have more people living in a small area. This is exactly what population distribution tells us. World population distribution is uneven. Places which are sparsely populated contain few people, while places which are densely populated contain many people. While the study of human population is a vast subject in itself, which is called demography, I have tried to cover some of the most commonly referred terms related to it. In my opinion, they are very relevant indicators when it comes to studying the issues related to the various aspects of population. Thank you.
Thank you, Trisha. The speaker has educated the audience about the various concepts associated with population. Our next speaker is Utkarsh Gurkhu from Euroschool Thane, a grade 5 student. He's a football enthusiast, a happy Liverpool fan, and an avid book reader. He also plays the drums and loves online games. So Utkarsh, the first speaker has opened the floor to several concepts. Would you like to share some data and statistics to elaborate the same?
Yes, of course. Let me take you through some statistics related to world population and human development. While it took 200,000 years for mankind to reach a population of 1 billion, it only took 200 more years to reach 7.8 billion presently. I repeat, 7.8 billion presently. Looking at the graphical representation of population on the left-hand side, we can see that the top 10 most populated countries house for more than half of the world's population, with India and China together accounting for almost one-third of the world's population. Pretty huge, right? And at the extreme end of the spectrum are small countries like Vatican City and Falkland Islands, with populations as low as approximately 825 and 3500 respectively. The world, sorry, as per the growth rate of 1.1 per year, which, by the way, my fellow speaker Trisha explained beautifully, the world population is expected to reach 8.5 billion by 2030 and 11.2 billion by 2100. This is evident when we look at the image on the right hand side. Can we have the next slide, please? In this slide, we can see the spread of population where Asia has almost half of the world's population and is the world's most densely populated continent. Next slide, please. In this slide, we see population distribution as per religion and climatic conditions. Human race is a beautiful mix of various faiths, with Christianity, Islam, and Hinduism being followed by maximum number of people in the world. Population is also a factor of climate, with warm regions generally having higher density. Thank you for the slides. I would like to draw your attention to the three most striking agendas of United Nations World Population Day. The first agenda is reproductive health. Friends, it's quite saddening to know that every year 5.4 million children die before celebrating their 5th birthday, out of which 2.5 million children die within the first month of birth. 36% of these deaths are due to preventable diseases, and another 30% of these deaths are due to birth-related complications. The second agenda is sustainable development. High population or high population density puts a strain on the resources of a country or region and can lead to natural calamities or human conflict. Friends, it's quite disheartening to know that almost one-third of the world's population does not have access to proper or basic sanitation facilities, and an estimated 500 million people live in ecologically fragile or conflict-affected countries. The third and the last important agenda behind observing United Nations World Population Day is gender equality. As per World Economic Forum's Gender Gap Report of 2018, it will take over 100 years for mankind to reach gender equality. This gender equality is based on following 4 parameters, namely, first, economic participation, second, health, third, education, and last but not least, political empowerment. Personally, I find these statistics, numbers, and analyses very interesting as they speak volumes about past, present, and future projections of human population on this wonderful planet of ours. Thank you.
Thank you, Utkarsh. Utkarsh has informed us about the population in relation to various contexts, which will aid in further discussion. I now welcome Mr. Vivek Luthra. Mr. Vivek Luthra is a senior panelist. He's a parent expert. He's currently working with the EY as a senior program manager. He's the father of Shambhavi Luthra of grade 5A. To talk about Mr. Vivek, he is a highly accomplished portfolio program lead with significant experience in transformation, product development, adoption, automation, change management, and account management to shape and deliver complex business and technology-led programs. He has strong verbal, written, and visual presentation skills with the ability to adapt to various environments with clear focus on goals and outcomes. He has demonstrated excellence and passion in managing complex programs to achieve quality results. Experience in talking program, operational and resource decisions for the benefit of the business. Mr. Vivek, would you please take us further into the data related to population distribution?
Absolutely, happy to. Hi, everyone. I'll start with a very powerful statement here. A finite world can support only a finite population. Therefore, population growth must eventually equal zero. But we all know this quote does not hold true, and it's contradicting to the population growth of the world, as we just discovered that it's just on the rise, and we all know that. If you take a look at the upcoming slides, I'll just wait for the slide to come up. Demography is the statistical study of human population. It encompasses the study of size, structure, distribution of these populations, and spatial or temporal changes in them in response to birth, migration, aging, and death. Now, as you can see, the distribution on your screen right now, the distribution of the world population over the last 5,000 years. What's interesting is that the series of maps show the distribution over a period of time. The first map in the top left corner of your screen shows the world population in 3000 BC. The last one is the map in 2000 AD. This gives us clarity on how our population has grown. And we have seen already on the previous slides that there has been a tremendous growth or jump in terms of the population in the last few years. Now, let me give you a better understanding and detail about the same. We'll move to the next slide, please. So if you see, optically to the naked eye, if you look at this graph, this looks somehow and somewhat skewed, because the chart shows the increase in the number of people living on the planet over the last 12,000 years. What is striking about this chart, of course, is that almost all this growth just happened very recently. So if you see the chart starting at 10,000 BC, there has been almost no growth for up until 2000 BC and beyond. And then all of a sudden, there has been a huge spike. Historical demographers estimate that around the year 1800, the world population was only about 1 billion people. After 1800, this changed fundamentally. The world population was around 1 billion in the year 1800 and increased 7-fold till then. It's pretty alarming. And also, as the population has grown, of course, it has brought about certain elements of uncertainty in the global environment. Around 108 billion people have ever lived on our planet. This means that today's population size makes up about 6.5% of the total number of people ever born. For the long period from the appearance of modern Homo sapiens up to the starting point of this chart in 10,000 BC, it is estimated that the total world population was often well under 1 million. Can we move to the next slide, please? In 1950, there were 2.5 billion people on the planet. Now in 2020, there are 7.7 billion. By the end of the century, the United Nations expects a global population of about 11.2 billion. The visualization of the population pyramid makes it possible to understand the enormous global transformation. And as you can see, the transformation is exponential. We are at a turning point in the global population history. Between 1950 and today, it is a widening of the entire pyramid, as you can see on our screens. An increase of the number of children that was responsible for the increase of the world population. Developed countries have benefited from this transition in the last decades and are now facing demographic problems of an increasingly large share of retired people that are not contributing to the labor market. Of course, that is an added pressure on the tax system. In the coming decades, it will be the developing countries that can benefit from this demographic dividend. The change from 1950 to today and the projections to 2100 or 2100 show a world population that is becoming healthier, which is a positive sign, of course. When the top of the pyramid becomes wider and looks less like a pyramid and instead becomes a more box-shaped view, the population lives through younger ages with very low risk of death and dies at an old age. We've just discovered that, and thanks to the science and medical systems that we have today, that we are able to see the pyramid taking a different shape. The demographic structure of a healthy population at the final stage of the demographic transition is the box shape that we see for the entire world for 2100 or 2100. That's the outer layer of the graph that you see on your screen. Now, this theory actually holds good for before the pandemic. Now, we all know that we are in the middle of a pandemic that most of us are seeing for the first time in our lives. Who would have imagined lockdowns? You can't step out of the house. That was never a possibility, at least not for me. And I'm sure for most of you as well. How this pandemic is affecting the population pyramid is what we have to focus on now, because this is how the population is going to move forward. The pandemic has certainly added to a high death ratio in the past 6 months throughout the world. The population most affected are middle-aged and old people. If this is taken into consideration now to reflect on our graph, the structure of the graph will remain as a pyramid. The pandemic clearly shows how the working population has reduced and in turn is adding to poverty. Now that's one of the critical areas that we all are aware of, poverty. And especially in the developing countries, control over growth of population is an essential condition for the country's rapid economic development, as we know. The whole demographic is changing due to this pandemic now. There are more births and less people to support the families due to infections and diseases leading to deaths. To make the graph look more like a square than the current pyramid, population control is required. Educating more women and making them self-dependent will curb poverty, as they will be self-reliant and take necessary measures for birth control. Now here, the government in any country plays a big role by making sure that people have access to proper education. I'm sure we've all heard about this, health-related information, women empowerment, which is a topic in itself, and a one-child legislation. This especially holds true for the developing countries. In the end, I'd like to call out something which a very famous astrophysicist and a science communicator said. Our job is to bring about a world demographic transition and flatten out that exponential curve by eliminating grinding poverty, making safe and effective birth control measures widely available, and extending real political power focused on executive, legislative, judicial, military, and in institutions influencing public opinion to women. If we fail, some other process less under our control will do it for us. And that's exactly what is happening right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Luthra. Mr. Vivek has armed us with a hoard of data, which will lead us to a better understanding as we go ahead. Our next speaker, Vihana Rai, is a 5th grader from Euroschool Airoli. She's a talented girl who likes dancing, doodling, and reading. And when she's not doing that, you'll find her at the basketball court. Vihana, if the projection of population growth by the UN nation is correct, in the next 84 years, there will be about 11 billion people. What will be the implications if we reach there?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. As we speak of overpopulation, the most recent data estimates by the United Nations says that the world population is already at 7.8 billion and is predicted to reach 10 billion by 2025. This exponential population growth has some severe and desired effects. Let me broadly classify them into two categories. Firstly, let me talk of the economic impact of overpopulation. A rapidly increasing population plunges the economy into mass unemployment and underemployment. As population increases, the proportion of workers to the total population rises, but in the absence of complementary resources, it is not possible to expand jobs. The result is that unemployment and underemployment increases. A rapidly increasing population reduces income, savings, and investment, thereby increasing unemployment. According to the NSSO report in 2019, India has a backlog of unemployment at 6%, which is increasing further with the rise of population. According to Malthus, food grows in arithmetic progression, whereas human population grows in geometric progression. So there will be more mouths to feed. In short, overpopulation with no improvement in agriculture and industrial technology, shortage of essential commodities, low standard of living, and together with unemployment is also responsible for poverty in underdeveloped countries. In addition to this, the exponential growth in population and the basic increasing developments have also put a lot of strain on the basic infrastructure required. There's a need for enhanced infrastructure and services such as housing, water supply, security, education, health, and waste management mechanisms to address the necessities of increased population. In the environmental front, with overpopulation resources, both natural and man-made are getting strained as the demand outstrips the availability. Limited resources like food and fuel are being overused and we may soon run out of it completely. Let's take water for instance. While there is plenty of water in the planet, it is very much a scarce resource. Only 2.5% of the water are fresh water and only a small fraction of that is unpolluted drinking water. According to the UN report, around 700 million people in 43 countries suffer from water scarcity. It is predicted by 2025, 1.8 billion people will be living in countries or regions with absolute water scarcity, and 2/3 of the world's population could be living under water-stressed conditions. In addition to this, due to destructive activities, man has extracted more minerals from the earth, animals have been hunted, and plants have disappeared, which has led to a loss of biodiversity and ecological imbalance. Deforestation, degradation of environment, and global warming are also few more environmental impacts of overpopulation. To sum things up, the impact of population is a tremendous and can be a major threat to humanity and the future of our planet. Thank you.
Thank you, Vihana. Vihana has listed various implications of overpopulation, which are our present-day concerns. I would now like to welcome M. Jitish Reddy, grade 5 student from Euroschool North Campus. Jitish is an extremely talented boy who excels in all fields. He is passionate about dance and is always there to give his friends the helping hand. He demonstrates persistence and excellence and is honest and caring. Jitish leaves no stone unturned to make sure your trust is not misplaced. Jitish, how does overpopulation affect the quality of life and individual goals of a human being? And how would migration mitigate?
Thank you, ma'am. Good evening to everyone present here. Let me quote what the World Health Organization states about quality of life. Quality of life is defined as the individual's perception of their position in life in the context of the culture and value systems in which they live and in relation to their goals. Someone's quality of life can be examined by how comfortable or satisfying their life is. There is a small relationship between population and quality of life, as there is an unfavorable effect on the quality of life if the population growth rate is high, which means that the available resources becomes less as it has to be shared among a lot of people. As the saying goes, there's enough resources for everybody's need, but not for anybody's greed. Well, you know how we humans are. Ma'am, next slide, please. There's enough resources for everybody's need, but not for anybody's greed. Well, you know how we humans are. We are very bad in population management too. The main aim of the population education is to help in the development of quality of life, which is a difficult task to attain. Now, next slide, please. The first factors of the population that affect the quality of life are the size of the population, population growth, and migration. The second comes social systems, political systems, and cultural values. The third factor is means and resources. It includes human resources, natural resources, and technology. And next slide, please. The standard of living is related to the income of every individual. The factors that affect the standard of living are employment, health, housing, food and nutrition, education, social service, etc. According to the Census 2068, around 5 people live in a family. The quality of life can only be imagined if the standard of education, health, etc. can be maintained. Food, shelter, and clothes are basic factors for the human body and health. An individual and the family lives in a society. He or she may not be happy only with the fulfillment of their basic and physical needs. Social and psychological needs are also essential, which has to be fulfilled. Next slide, please. Talking about migration, it is movement of people across boundaries. Most employment opportunities are the most common reasons due to which people migrate. Except this lack of opportunities, quality education, globalization, and natural disasters, etc., can be the cause of migration. It is always a search of better quality of life in this wasteland. By wasteland, I mean the modern world with less hope, less sympathy, and love. Let me conclude my talk with a food for a thought. Do you think population growth is the primary source of environmental damage? If so, don't you think the lockdown would have given time for Mother Earth to heal herself? Thank you.
Thank you, Jitish. Jitish has taken up the fundamental issue regarding population studies. Our concern would be two biotic aspects. One is the human being itself, and the second is the biotic environment. I would now like to welcome Anvita Bhandari, who is the head girl for primary school Euroschool Airoli. She likes reading Nancy Drew and other adventure series. She dances to the Tatkar of Kathak and plies of ballet, and she also plays the piano and cello. The biggest contributors to the present level of population growth globally are India and several African countries, while many countries, especially in the Europe, face depopulation because of their low birth rate. Do you think underpopulation could be a bigger threat, Anvita?
Yes. The famous economist Thomas Malthus quoted, "The superior power of population cannot be checked without causing misery or vice." Ma'am, next slide, please. As my friend rightly mentioned about overpopulation, I would like to draw your attention to countries like Canada, Australia, and Kazakhstan, which are underpopulated. As per UN reports, there are 13 countries with human population less than 1 lakh. Vatican City is the least populated country of the world with a population of 805 as on 9th July 2020. Few other countries like Nauru, Tuvalu, and Marshall Islands are amongst countries with population less than 1 lakh. So what is underpopulation? Underpopulation is the situation whereby the size of the population is small in relation to available resources in the country. So as I was asked in the beginning about underpopulation being a threat, yes, underpopulation is a threat and has a set of implications of its own. Ma'am, next slide please. High rate of immigrants due to lack of specialized workforce. Underpopulated countries tend to be ones which encourage immigration as they need more people to achieve their full economic potential. Diaspora means the movement of people from their homeland to other countries. Indian nurses and construction workers are the best example for this. For every additional mouth to feed, there are 2 additional hands to work. A strong population base has the potential to export skilled and unskilled manpower. Lower taxes collected by government. In an underpopulated country, there are less people and therefore lesser resources to exploit technology or natural resources, therefore resulting in less income. When people will earn lower income, there will be lower taxes collected by government. Lower or no exports resulting in lower gross domestic product of the country. Underpopulated countries have a lot of resources and can easily export excess produce. However, due to the lack of manpower, there will be lower exports, resulting in lower income for the country as a whole. Foreign economic involvement. Foreign companies invest in underpopulated countries since they lack the population to support large organizations. The best example would be Canada, where 40% of businesses are foreign owned, especially by the USA. Lack of infrastructure and other facilities, and underutilization of resources. There will be fewer schools and hospitals since there are not enough people to support them. Public transports will not be well developed due to fewer customers. There will be lesser innovations and developments due to lack of specialized skills. All of these result in underutilization of resources. Lower number of people in the economically active population. As my friend mentioned about the population pyramid, underpopulated countries have less working or economically active population, therefore impacting progress of the country's economy. Ma'am, next slide please. Optimum population is the level at which standard of living is maximized. Thank you.
Thank you, Anvita. Well, there's always the other side of the coin. The speaker has brought out the bane of underpopulation. And now I welcome our industry expert, a senior panelist, Ms. Abhilipsa Bhainipati. She's a bachelor's in engineering, currently working with TCS as a process consultant. She has a rich work experience of 18 years. Ms. Abhilipsa has published her book on poems titled Gust of Wind. A skillful orator with a love for reading various subjects, she has won accolades in inter-school youth parliament and inter-college debate competitions as well. Currently, she is actively involved in her organization's various internal awareness programs in healthcare, work-life balance, safety issues, as well as rigor in operations. She's a proud mother to her 11-year-old twins. Welcome, ma'am. As we sit here discussing the world population and its implication, who bears the burden of it all?
Okay, very good evening to all the principals, the teachers, our junior panelists, and all the senior panelists here. I vaguely remember when I was in a 9th or 10th standard, I had to deliver a speech on population implication. You know what? I very distinctly remember that the implications which I had highlighted at that point of time are much less graver than what is being implicated by the kids of this generation. Of course, we cannot take this lightly. And you know what? This is the generation which is actually bearing the brunt. So if we go to the slide, the first slide which I want to show you talks about the world population data. So we can very well see here the global population right now in 2020 is around 779 crores. And every year, the world adds more than 8 crores new faces. The UN projects that without further action, there will be 2 billion additional people in the year 2020. And by 2050, it's going up by 3.5 billion. But one good news which we can see in the slide is the yearly increase is slightly dropping since 2014. Can we move to the next slide, please? Okay, so this slides talk about the urban crowd. It was 47% in the year 2000 and 56% in the year 2020. For most of our existence, the human population was in check because of climatic fluctuations, medicines, and other social factors. It was until 1804, the year 1804, Mr. Vivek Luthra also, pointed this out. In 1804, we realized that we have reached 1 billion people. Since then, continuing improvements in nutrition, medicine, and technology have seen our population increase very rapidly. And there are many factors to play here. Essentially, it is what is happening within those populations, basically their distributions, their density, the migration patterns, and urbanizations. What matters is the compositions, age, sex, and income levels of people, and most importantly, their consumption patterns that are of equal, if not more importance than just numbers. Can we move on to the next slide, please? Okay, so this slide talks about the population density. What is a population density? Basically, it can be calculated for a country, a city, or another territory, or for the entire world. For example, the population density of Mumbai right now is 28,508. We can see two clubs here, the Club 1 and Club 2. So you can very well see that in one unit, in Club 1, there are only 10 people, whereas in Club 2, there are 20 people. So this is how we can see how the population has been increasing rapidly over the years. And Manila, for example, Manila, it has a population density of around 41,515 per square kilometer. Can we move to the next slide, please? Okay, this is another slide which clearly shows the population density, 41 people per square kilometer in the year 2000, whereas in 2020, it's 52 people per square kilometer. Next slide, please. The most critical question, the crucial question, who bears the burden of overpopulation? Mother Earth. So now I'll talk about the implications of population on Mother Earth. Basically, population and climate change are inextricably linked. Every additional person increases carbon emissions, the rich far more than the poor, and increases the number of climate change victims, the poor far more than the rich. The effects of global warming are already bringing harm to human communities and the natural world. And further temperature rises will have a devastating impact and more action on greenhouse emissions, which is urgently required. Can we go to the next slide, please? So this slides talk about what is the impact of population raise, how exactly the depletion of resources is happening. So distinctly, there are 4 things which have been highlighted by me here. The first one is a bad air. Second is depletion of fuel. Third is land deforestation. And the fourth one is water scarcity. More people on planet, the more the population is, the depletion of Fertilizers, herbicides, pesticides, fossil fuels, oil leakage will be more, land deforestation and development, soil erosion, minerals mine, waste and toxic byproducts of manufacturing will be more. So this is how the Mother Earth is being impacted. Can we go to the next slide, please? Desertification. Of course, currently the health and livelihoods of nearly 1 billion people in 100 countries are threatened by the desertification of land. The desertification of land has caused the agriculture has failed, and there's no growth basically of the crops in those countries. The food shortages and starvation, 1 in 8 in the world are now dying of hunger. So we can see how devastating it is. Next slide, please. Water supply contamination. We know that water supply contamination is something which is causing severe illness, diseases. 3.4 million people die each year because of contaminated water-related diseases. Overpopulation will only create polluted water. And disappearance of non-renewable resources is something which I have highlighted. It is estimated that the Earth's supply of natural gas will actually run out in 35 years. It may happen sooner if the population rate continues to grow. So just imagine the plight. Next slide, please. The most important thing which we all are facing now, easily spread diseases. I have highlighted tuberculosis here, where people who come closer, they get the airborne diseases. 8.6 million people have died of tuberculosis in 2012. But what we are facing right now in this COVID-19 times is extremely, extremely disappointing. We know that people are dying of COVID-19, there are deaths, hospitals are packed. So it is all because of population. And more than that, there is an anxiety, there is depression in people. So basically the root cause is population here. Now comes environmental damage. Last but not the least, is the most important point which I would like to highlight here. What is carbon footprint? I would like to focus here on carbon footprint, which is basically the total greenhouse gases emitted by an individual or an organization, a service or a product, which is carbon dioxide equivalent. Greenhouse gases, including carbon-containing gases and methane, are also emitted through burning of fossil fuels, clearance of land, production and consumption of certain food, manufactured goods, materials, woods, and transportation and other services. You can also measure the carbon footprint using a calculator, which you can actually find in various websites. It shows you in which your living habits damage the environment. The carbon footprint usually is measured in tons of CO2 every year. For example, in America, every citizen produces about 28 tons of carbon dioxide and other dangerous gases a year. And in Great Britain, the amount is about 10 tons. People around the world are beginning to address the problem by reducing the carbon footprint through less consumption and a better technology. But unsustainable human population growth can actually overwhelm those efforts, leading us to conclude that we can not only reduce it with smaller footprints, but by fewer feet. So basically, we are done with most of our points, which I had highlighted. So I would like to end my speech with a few lines. The world that you and I live is increasingly challenged. Population growth, pollution over consumptions, unsustainable patterns, social conflicts, climate changes, loss of nature. These are certainly not good stories. So let's think about it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. This is more than a wake-up call. Our next junior panelist is Purvi Dumbal from Grade 5 Euro School, North Campus, Bangalore. She's a dynamic prospect and is filled with high spirits. Her accomplishments in dance and craft are commendable. Purvi, population we just saw is exerting pressure on resources. Are the wants of yesteryears becoming the needs of today? Purvi? We'll come back to Purvi in some time. I think we've lost the connection. I would like to now welcome Miss Katie. She's our teacher expert. I would like to introduce her. She's working as a lead teacher in Thane campus. She's a BCom, BEd, and a master's in management from Mumbai University. She has worked in the corporate sector for 15 years in human resource domain. From training grown-ups, she's made a brave move to train young and impressionable minds. She loves music, reading, and interacting with people. She lives in Thane with her husband and 11-year-old son. One of our panelists brought up the term working population. How do you think it is linked to demographic dividend? And how can young population make development possible?
Thank you, Smriti, for the wonderful introduction. Good evening, one and all. The two keywords that I would like to pick up from what you mentioned, Smriti, is one, demographic dividend, and second, development. Now, I know the audience over here is a mix of parents as well as students. So I've tried to keep my content simple. However, the topic is not that simple, but let's try how it goes. Yes. So yes, we are 7.6 billion on this planet now, and we are likely to see a billion more faces in next 10 years. Our ecological footprint is surely competing with the carrying capacity of Earth. And sure, it's a matter of huge concern for one and all. Hence, one perspective to look at this population growth is how can we contain it or how can we stabilize it? And that's why we hear about concepts like family planning tools, lower mortality rates, and other health-related initiatives. Now, there can be another perspective to population growth over here, right? What if we look at it from an economic development point of view? Then we need to ask ourselves, can we nurture and exploit this population growth to our best advantage? It is with this background, I would like to introduce you to the term demographic dividend. Next slide, please. Yeah. So demographic dividend of a country is a benefit that it enjoys because of its demographic profile. Now, as we see in the slide, there are three demographic profiles for a country. First, age group 0 to 14 years, age group 15 to 64, and age group 65 and above. Now, the first and the third group, the third category, they are known as the dependents. Whereas the second category is known as the working age population. In simple words, the kids and the senior citizens are the mouths that need to be fed from, by the working population who are the hands of earning. Obviously, the favorable situation is definitely going to be where there are more hands to earn than more mouths to feed. And this is exactly the benefit a country gets when the working population outgrows its number of dependents. So when does the stage of demographic dividend exactly set in for a country? Let's have a look. Next slide, please. Yes. Now here we can see that there are three phases of demographic transition. The words may seem a little heavy, children, over here, but trust me, the concept is pretty simple. A developing country typically goes through three phases of changes. Phase 1 is characterized by low infant mortality rate. Now, typically what happens is government of any country has a mandate of providing improved healthcare facilities to all its people. And when this starts kicking off, the infant mortality rate falls down. That means lesser babies die at birth. And therefore we see a baby boom, right? After this, the country steps into the next phase where this baby boomers, they grow up, okay? And they create a pool of workforce. Now, this is the stage where the first demographic dividend comes in for the country, because there were a lot of children earlier, they have all grown up, and now they have joined the workforce. At this stage itself, there is an opportunity to earn a second dividend as well. That is in the form of improved healthcare of these baby boomers. They live longer, they save more, and their savings internally triggers more investments for the country. And this accelerates the GDP rate. There are many countries today who have gone through phase 1 and phase 2 as well. For example, Brazil, USA, China, they've gone through the first as well as second demographic dividend stage. Finally comes phase 3 for a country. Now what happens is the baby boomers now start getting old. So now, and then there is a lesser desire to have more children in a country by this stage. So the baby boom is replaced by the baby bust. So, and there is increase in the number of non-earning old people. And that is this stage where proportion of old people is more than the young proportion, than the young population. And here it reduces the per capita income drastically. Countries like Japan, Germany, Italy are currently in this phase where they are facing a decreasing population. So dividend, as we see from this slide over here, the demographic dividend occurs in phase 2, okay, where the working age population is higher than the proportion of children and elderly people. Next slide, please. Some word of caution I would like to highlight over here about demographic dividend is that it should not be considered as a guarantee of improved standard of living. So once a country gets a benefit of the first or the second dividend, we cannot think that it is the standard of living is going to be high forever. Demographic dividend is just a window of opportunity, right? Because ultimately in the long run, it is not the quantity of people that will matter as much as the quality of people. So more a country invests in its people, either through their health, education, skill development, training, only then that population is going to be productive and profitable for the country. Next slide, please. Certain advantages that a country gets because of demographic dividend are listed down here. The first one is obviously increase in labor supply. More people in the working age population means more labor available in the country. Secondly, important point is also a rise in the women workforce. Now what happens is by this stage, the fertility rate in women falls down. And because of this, they are joining the workforce. And this is an extremely important point because it is a new source of growth for that country. Additionally, there is an increase in fiscal space. It simply means that the children of the country, rather than focusing on the child raising, the country now at this stage focus on human and the physical infrastructure development. And of course, more people work, so more savings will happen in the country, which takes form of national savings. And at the end, we see that there is a massive shift towards the middle class society. That is the rise in the aspirations of a class. All this ultimately leads to better economic growth. Now, just to give an example, Japan was among the first major economies to experience rapid growth because of demographic dividend. Actually, it added up to 15% of the overall growth in such economies. Next slide, please. Let's have a look at some case studies who have, benefited from demographic dividend. I would like to mention the East Asian tigers comprising of Hong Kong, Taiwan, South Korea, and Singapore. We all know these Southeast Asian tigers, these countries, and the level of development they have shown, right? So this is a compelling evidence of demographic dividend over here. Excuse me. These countries began with solid efforts in family planning campaigns, lowering their fertility rates, and improving the life expectancy. The factors which led to this demographic dividend for these 4 countries were, obviously they had more baby boomers, working women population started increasing. So whatever are the advantages, this country capitalized on all of these factors. The savings rate increased. Important point over here is on the education system. They invested in the human capital. They invested in education. They reviewed and revamped the education system. there were more college degree holders, and this increased the proportion of skilled workforce to a drastic extent. And the countries also paid a lot of attention to skill development of its population and also focused on exports. So human capital development along with strong economic policies have given these countries a great advantage. Now, Africa is another example which I would like to mention here. It's a case, where it's not a great situation currently because the demographics of this country has been quite unique. The fertility rates in Africa has still remained very high, close to 5, which means that each woman has an average of 5 children as on date. And globally, this rate is just around 2. So in spite of the fact that significant progress has been made to decrease the mortality. So now in Africa, lesser people are dying, but the number of people being born is extremely high. Now this has led to a continuing population explosion instead of a baby boom. And this has resulted in economic stagnation in almost the entire African countries. So what we understand over here is that having a huge population is not going to work in itself. Demographic dividend works on the structure and the ability of the economy to absorb these extra workers. Next slide, please. Our India, we are definitely interested in knowing where India stands as far as demographic dividend is concerned. So yes, India is the most talked about country, understandably, because currently we are the second highest population after China. We are going to overtake China in a couple of years, right? India is said to be a very young country, and it's simply because we have a huge base of working age population. Almost 62% of our population is in the second category, 15 to 64 years. And the dependents are the balance, 38%. So yes, it is definitely a potential. It is definitely works to our advantage. Our demographics is stronger probably by any other country as on date. So the real question for us is whether we can increase our rate of economic growth. Can we improve the well-being of our people, or whether we will just render ourselves ineffective in productively employing this extra workforce that we have. Next slide, please. Yeah. So how is the dividend going to be? I mean, the previous slide, please. Can we have the previous slide? Yeah, thank you. The next, realizing the dividend. Thank you. Yes. So how do we realize this dividend in India? If we look at this slide over here in the first left-hand side box, so there's a gap, excuse me, there's a gap between demographic dividend and increased economic growth. How can this gap be bridged? It can be bridged only by enhancing the productivity of our working population. Okay, till the time the country doesn't increase the productivity, the human capital, the quality of the working force, this economic growth that we want is not going to be achieved. And the demographic, though we have the demographic advantage, but we will not realize unless there is work done on the quality development of its people. So experts have proposed a 5-point plan on how India should move about this. First point definitely is education. We know the rate of dropouts from school. We know that literate person currently is defined as the one who can read and write his name, you know. So we need a system to catch up with the industry demands as well. Now, I've read a report where it says that just 1 out of 4 graduates currently in India is actually employable. So this employability issue has been around for quite some time now in our country. Okay, there is a gap between what the industry wants and what the youth has to offer. And this gap, bridging of this gap, you know, this talent shortages or skill deficit as we may call, has to be the primary agenda of the policymakers and the government of our country. The third point is, of course, employment. Unless there are jobs that are going to be created, what is this workforce going to do? It's not going to come and generate additional income for the country if there are no jobs. Women participation is a very important point because women need to be empowered. currently the proportion of women in the workforce is very, very less as compared to other countries when we see. And last but not the least, healthcare. India has to develop its healthcare facilities and make them more accessible so that the productivity of its workforce is optimum. Next slide, please. Yes. So having put the 5-point plan to realize the demographic dividend, what else can be done? One, as I mentioned, is building the human capital. Okay, so yes, it's not that country is not doing anything. There are initiatives taken by the government, like development of NSDC, that is the National Skill Development Corporation. It is working on academic and industry collaborations. It is working on schemes like Ayushman Bharat and National Health Protection Schemes. So these all schemes and policies are, being formulated, and they are being implemented by states currently. Another positive point for us is that India's ranking in the World Bank's ease of doing business is also improving. The initiatives like Startup India, Make in India are definitely going to give a boost to the employment generation in the country. So though there are policies that are being made, but what remains is, these policies need to get converted into solid action plans at the ground root level. I think what I mean over here is that, every state in India we say is like a different country. If we look, states like South or Maharashtra, they show different pattern. And whereas you look at the BIMARU states, now BIMARU states is the acronym used for Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, and Uttar Pradesh. Now these are the 4 states which have a very different picture as compared to the South or the West of India. Today, even today in these states, these BIMARU states, children are looked upon as insurance policies. So the fertility of women in these states is currently very high, right? So when a center proposes a policy, we need state level responses as well, because every state has its own, indicators and own population dynamics. So there has to be thinking on these terms and how people are going to get trained, how are they going to get skilled, how are jobs going to be created. All this has to be worked out at a local state level as well. Can we have the next slide? So with this, I would come back to the question that was raised by Smriti ma'am. So is working age population linked to demographic dividend? Most certainly, yes, because with a disproportionate number of old people, which countries like Japan and Germany are going through. Now they have old people, they have more of old people, and what they are facing currently is a demographic tax or a demographic burden. Okay, so definitely the more working age population a country has, the more opportunity, the more window for earning or gaining from the demographic dividend. And secondly, can a young population make economic development possible? Certainly yes, provided the policymakers of the country align their policies, there is investment in human capital, and there is empowerment of women. These are the 3, according to me, the focus areas where young population can make development possible. I would just like to close by saying that desired positive output is never automatic. What's automatic is just a weed. Okay, it's useless in every aspect. If we want a fruit-bearing tree, we need to sow the seeds, we need to water it, we need to nurture it, and we need to wait. Demographic dividend is no different. If the increased workforce is not sufficiently skilled, educated, and provided gainful employment, the country would definitely move from demographic dividend to demographic disaster. So with this, I would thank you for patiently listening to me, and back to you, Smriti ma'am.
Thank you, Katie ma'am. Katie ma'am has taken a hard look at the issues confronting us. And now we'll try and connect back to Purvi from grade 5 Thane. Good evening, Purvi, you there?
Yes, ma'am.
Purvi, we've heard in our speeches till so far that population is exerting pressure on our resources. Are the wants of yesteryears becoming the needs of today?
Any need is something you have to survive. However, a want is simply the desire for something. A traditional list of immediate basic needs is food, shelter, and clothing. Modern day list of basic needs is not just that, but also sanitation, education, and healthcare. All of these have become today's needs. Throughout history, and especially during this 20th century, environmental degradation has primarily been a product of our efforts to secure improved standards of food, clothing, shelter, comfort, and recreation for the growing population, leading to the wants of yesteryears becoming the need of today. For example, purchases can technically be categorized as a need, even though most would consider them a want. Does eating an expensive meal at a high-end restaurant qualify as a need? Or what about clothes? Do you have to stick with generic sneakers, or can you splurge on a pair of expensive shoes? Ultimately, it's all about perspective and how you choose to live. There are things we need and want. That is part of living an interesting and fulfilling life. Technology, which was once a want, has become the need of the hour. Ever imagine your life without a vehicle or a smartphone? Surely not. Technology has made it so much easier and accessible for all of us. Given the situation under this lockdown, what would one have done without technology, which was once looked upon as a want? Technology has made communication easy. The invention of computers, mobile phones, and the internet has turned out to be a boon for mankind and has made the process of communication faster, simpler, and effective. It increases productivity. The inventions of the latest technology and machinery have increased the overall production in industrial sectors. Technology provides a secured environment. The invention of webcams, CCTV, or surveillance cameras have led to a secure environment for humans. The process of banking has become authentic and secure. Today, by just using a plastic or credit card,
I think we've lost connection with Purvi again. So we'll come back to Purvi in some time. Meanwhile, I think she's talking about over consumerism, and she's critically placed the blame at the doorstep and warned us against it. So our next speaker for the day is Ms. Shubhangi Senapati, a grade 5 student of Euroschool Whitefield, Bangalore. Her dream is to be a singer, and her hobbies include reading books, playing the synthesizer, and singing. She has achieved Top Performer Award in Kumon, Philby, and other Olympiads. Shubhangi, what are some of the policies that adopted by the Indian government and the success so far? Over to you, Shubhangi.
Yes, ma'am. The effects of overpopulation are profoundly severe. I would like to share a PowerPoint presentation with regards to this topic. The world's population is expected to increase to 9.7 billion in 2050 and could peak at nearly 11 billion around 2100 as per the United Nations. Governments are changing policies continuously to keep checks and balances between the population and natural resources. So different countries plan their population policy based on their needs. Let's move to the next slide. Then what about our country, and how are we dealing with this problem? According to World Population Prospects 2019 report by the United Nations, the population of India is set to becoming the highest populated country in the world. India is the first country in the world to begin a population control program in 1952 by implementing the family planning program. On a positive note, the vast majority of the population in India would become assets if they are given means to lead a healthy and economically productive life. Moving on to the next slide. I would like to mention some good incentives that the government can look into to encourage smaller families. Development of agriculture and industry will generate more employment, improving the standard of living and adoption of small family norms. Development of rural areas with proper education and awareness will lead to decrease in poverty. The 2 children norm related policy introduced by Assam, whereby those having more than 2 children are ineligible for government jobs. Andhra Pradesh, Bihar, Gujarat, Maharashtra, Odisha, Rajasthan and Uttarakhand have laws barring couples with more than 2 children from contesting local body elections. Other states can also take a cue from these states. Coming to whether it has been a success rate, I would like to say in some aspects yes and some no. No center brought a bill to regulate population growth as couples in India decide the number of children they want. The Population Control Bill 2016 presented never came to the voting stage till it was dissolved for 2019 Lok Sabha elections. Many states have adopted policies barring a couple with more than 2 children to contest local body elections. Truth is, such people are not barred from contesting major elections. With this, I conclude that it is high time we support our nation in the various rules and regulations that are brought forward to control the overpopulation crisis that we are facing. Thank you.
Thank you, Shubhangi. Turning closer home, the speaker has held a mirror to our face. We need to begin action at home. With this, I welcome our next speaker, Ms. Prisha Dave. She's a grade 5 student from Euroschool Whitefield. She has achieved many medals and certificates in various fields such as Olympiads, oration, and writing. Her hobbies include reading, baking, crafts, and biology. She has a vivid imagination, which she beautifully expresses in the form of stories and poems. And she wants to work in the field of endocrinology and find a cure to all related problems. Prisha, UN adopts a theme each year to create awareness. What open suggestions do you want to give to the UN Secretary General to make a difference to the crisis of overpopulation?
Thank you, ma'am. Population explosion is a social problem and it is deeply rooted in society. So, efforts must be made to remove the social evils in our country. I would like to share a PowerPoint presentation that I have made regarding this topic. Although population growth in the 20th and 21st centuries has rocketed, it can be slowed, stopped, and reversed. The boom in birth rate is responsible for the rapid growth in population. Measures can be taken to get this under control. Some of them are social measures and economic measures. Moving on to the next slide. One of the most effective steps we can take towards achieving this goal is to choose a smaller family size and empower those who can't make that choice. In the next slide, educating girls. Can we please have the next slide? Educating girls and raising the marriage age from 18 to 21 plays a very important part of this. Where women and girls have economic empowerment, education, and freedom, they choose to have smaller families as they are more mature. Adoption is also a great way to control the population. There are many abandoned children in the world who need parents to look after them. With the right awareness, couples will be able to make the wiser choice. Under economic measures, the first and foremost measure is to raise employment avenues in rural as well as urban areas. This step can check population growth. Improved standard of living acts as a deterrent to large family norms. And in this next slide, the explanation for this is the population of our country is increasing at an immense rate, and due to limited resources, it is not possible to meet the demands of everyone. The UN projects that Population growth over the next century will be driven by the world's very poorest countries. Escaping poverty is not just a fundamental human right, but also a vital way to bring birth rates down. International aid, fair trade, and global justice are all tools to help bring the global population back to sustainable levels. During this pandemic, supply chains across the globe are being disrupted, affecting birth control supplement supply and also causing the increased risk of unintended pregnancies. So, ma'am, my suggestion to the UN Secretary General about this would be to reach out to women in need and supply essentials, especially in underdeveloped countries, and to educate women and establish gender equality, especially during this pandemic. It is not just about controlling the population, but also about creating a healthy society. I think that if women are educated and empowered, half of the problems will disappear with the blink of an eye. So, instead of controlling the environment for the benefit of the population, perhaps we should control the population to ensure the survival of our environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Prisha. And we now move to the last speaker for the day, Ms. Shamini Murugesh. She is our expert speaker today. Ms. Shamini is a co-founder and honorary chief mentor of WNS Cares Foundation. She has years of hands-on experience in community development and has established two noteworthy organizations in the area of CSR, S-Prayas and WCF. Shamini ma'am, in the words of Benjamin Franklin, an investment in knowledge pays the best interest. How true is this in the population empowerment drive in India, considering we are crossing the 8 billion mark?
Thank you, Smriti, and good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here on this panel today, and I must compliment the children on their absolute clarity of thought and delivery of their thoughts. I would actually like to pick up from where Ms. Katie spoke about demographic advantage. Because as you know, in India, we have this huge population of almost 1.38 billion. And how do we plan to use this to the maximum advantage in the manner in which it contributes to our nation's growth? And before I continue, I'd like a small request. So as I speak during the talk, if you could make a note of few key words, key sentences, or thoughts that appeal to you. I'll tell you at the end of it what we're going to do with that. Now let's speak about the population in India and the demographic population that we're looking at this point of time. So the average age is 26. It's one of the youngest populations in the world. And this age 26 demographic is going to continue till the year 2055. So that is one advantage that we have. As a nation, inherently, we are inclined towards education. Third, because of the fact of this huge population, we have a tendency to want to succeed. Now let me move on to the idea of education itself. You have academic, you have non-academic education. We study various subjects, we study science, math, literature. And very often children think, why are we studying so many different things? The reason is that we are actually training our brain to think in different ways. Mathematics teaches you logic, science teaches you a process, literature teaches you creativity. How many times have you thought about Harry Potter, for example? How did this lady think about these ideas? How did she come up with this? And that is what education is about. It gives you an inquiring mind. Education, of course, gives you knowledge, but more importantly, it should give you an inquiring mind. And this education that we talk about should not be restricted to urban areas. We need to expand it to rural, to the smallest of villages, give quality education to each and every person. So when we talk about this form of education, the new things that are being developed by the school boards, which is vocational training. Katie spoke about employability. There is a crying need to include vocational training. Also, local specific kind of advantages, cultures should be celebrated by using these for vocational training, which will be different, say, in Maharashtra, as will be different in, say, West Bengal. I'd like to share with you about a person called Fred Swanicker. He has created something called the African Leadership University. And what he does over there is, the university is very unique and different. So children do not choose subjects. What they choose are missions. So if a country has 7 challenges, for example, that it wants to address, the children are encouraged to choose 3 missions that they will work on. The teachers only point them in the direction of books or what is it that you can learn to ensure that your mission succeeds. And at the end of the 4 years of their study, they have to go through 4 internships. They have to come up with a thesis, which is basically a business plan. So what happens at the end of this journey for children from or students from this university is that they have a business plan. They've created a network by virtue of having worked in all these places, and they have the skills that are required on the ground to work to make this business plan succeed. So for example, if you take a child has taken housing as one of his or her missions, the child will study architecture, history, business. How do you make this whole mission work? And what happens in this is the person is also creating opportunity for others, taking other people with them in creating jobs. Speaking of another aspect that some of the panelists spoke about, the gender divide. It is a known fact by UNICEF has done studies. The Center for Oriental Studies has done immense research on this topic. And they have found that when a girl is educated, the family is taken care of in a much better manner. The family benefits. It is an investment in the future. I'll give you an example of a story I read about a girl who was probably 23, 24 in Gujarat. I think she had just finished her schooling or her graduation. And somewhere during the course of her education, she had learned about the ham radio. And what she used to do is she used to listen to news from various parts of the world, compile and curate it in a manner that was relevant to her village, and sent out these messages via SMS. And this was a village that had intermittent electricity, had water issues. And through this medium of spreading news around, she was able to get the buy-in of various people to speak about these specific problems and ensure that the village got solar power, ensure that the water issues were solved. Now let's also talk about people who go abroad and study and come back. There's been a tendency of late where people study abroad, work abroad, and they have come back. I can give you examples of Dhruv Lakhan. He runs a courier service called Miracle Couriers that employs hearing impaired. There is this girl, Rupa Purushottam, who has started a school, Avsara, for children, particularly for girls. You have the Snapdeal founder, co-founder, Kunil Bhal. All these people have learned various techniques and brought it back into India so that they're able to help India develop, create more jobs, make the population usefully, productively engaged. Now, you remember I spoke about, take some ideas, some sentences that I spoke about. Now, think of them as pieces of a puzzle. And each one of us who have made notes of this, put it together to create a unique puzzle and share it with your teachers. Parents share it with your children. And I would love to hear what has come out of this puzzle. Because what is education? It is not just about listening to this talk. Like Shruti ma'am had said in the beginning, it is not just about knowledge. It is about how you will use this knowledge. So what are the puzzles that will emerge from this discussion on population? Can you imagine 10, 15 years from now, if you are able to tell someone, you know, my school had this session on population, much like one of the panelists had said, that she was, you know, when she was young, she had to give a speech on population. The whole impact of having this discussion becomes more fruitful when you think much more than what is in the present. For example, what does education do? Education gives you an opportunity. Education gives you knowledge. Education gives you employability. Education gives you the opportunity to take people with you, to give jobs, to be part of a social venture. Before I leave, I'd like to just leave you with one thought, some food for thought as it were. 1.38 billion educated Indians is equal to 1.38 billion opportunities to build this nation. Thank you.
Thank you, Shamini ma'am. Wise words in the direction of doing what needs must be done towards proper empowerment and utilization of existing population. We now open the floor to question and answer. I invite our primary cultural in charge, Euroschool Airoli, Ms. Sita Lakshmi, to coordinate the same. Thank you.
Thank you, Smriti ma'am. We would be having time to take about 3 questions for today. Our first question, I would like to direct it to Ms. Abhilipsa. Our students are curious to know the process of census in India and how the migration of paper census to digital census will happen for the 2021 census. Abhilipsa ma'am.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. As I am there in TCS, I can answer because digitalization is something which has been happening all these years because our government has been emphasizing on digitalization across various platforms. It is basically for a digitally empowered society and a knowledge economy. So Census 2021 is going to be a revolutionary change, no doubt. And we will be moving from a paper census to a digitalized census. So what we have heard is, Mr. Amit Shah also emphasized on this, that the census will be conducted through a mobile app. So basically, it's like moving away from the traditional pen and paper mode, thereby reducing the burden of enumerators with bundles of forms going from house to house, collecting the head counts. So they will have a mobile app with them. So the data will be entered in that particular phone. And we will also create a national population register, NPR, which is being prepared in the year 2021. It is going to be activated. So this mammoth nationwide exercise will be carried out in 16 languages, and 12,000 crores will be invested in this particular exercise. And you know what, this will be helpful in many things like the duplications. We have like many cards. We have Aadhaar card, we have passports, PAN card. So these duplications will be avoided as we will have one card with us, which will have all the data. So basically, when a child is born, the child need not, the parents need not go and get a birth certificate for the child. The data will be automatically updated in the mobile app. Similarly, the death certificate need not be acquired. It will be automatically updated in the mobile phone. Basically, if a boy turns 18, he needs to go and apply for a voter's card. So this will also be eliminated because we have we have an app basically which will be auto updated. So this is going to be a revolutionary thing, and it's definitely going to help our country. I hope I answered your query.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Absolutely, and it's incredible what good use we are putting technology to. Thank you, Abhilipsa, ma'am. My next question is for Ms. Shamini Murugesh. Ma'am, what about the role of NGO and the private sector in creating awareness about population growth or population stabilization? Your views, ma'am.
Thank you. So, whether we're talking about population or whether we're talking about education, it is a massive challenge. It is a massive problem. It cannot be solved by an NGO, by one government, by one person, or by one corporate. It has to be a collaborative effort where everybody is working towards one particular mission and goal. And in a country like India, where we have so many states with their individual cultures and differences, it is not possible to have one solution. So there's a theory that we have something called actually the Ferrero's model. I'm sorry, it's a little academic, but very, very apt for a situation like what we have on hand. So it talks about participatory architecture, where every person involved, so when I say person, I mean an NGO, a corporate, governments, so there has to be participatory architecture. Secondly, we have to have something known as multi-vocal inscription, wherein various voices and interpretations of the goal is allowed for. And the last is distributed experimentation, where every state, every village is allowed within this umbrella to work on various experimental things that will work for their particular region, and go with what works and drop what doesn't work. So this is the kind of model that one has to use when we deal with an issue like population.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you so much for your views on it. My next question is more on an individual level. Like, what are the small things that responsible citizens, like we as responsible citizens, can do? Mr. Vivek Luthra, my question is for you. What is the one change that we can make at the grassroots level on things like population or poverty, things like those? So as an individual, what would be your views for me?
We have a mixed set of people on this call. We have children who are listening very, very attentively and carefully. I'd just throw in this one statement, and possibly that should answer this question. And everyone should go back possibly thinking why this statement was used. If you really want to change something and grow this nation, start by making your own bed. When I say that, I mean, let's start by introspecting as to what we need to do to get better as citizens, as people who are educated, who have a social responsibility. And let's think about then what is that one change that we can bring in around our society which we live in. And once again, I'll say, if you really want to change something and grow, start by making your own bed. So go back, think about it. What is it that we are talking about here? What is it that we actually do? You know, I can go on and on with the list, but a couple of things that I'd leave everyone with. The next time we step out, make sure that no matter where you are, what you're doing, you do not litter outside. No matter what you do, where you are, do not engage with a government official and pay bribe just because you want to get away with something or get your work done. Let's be responsible citizens, and let's ensure that we are doing our bit to make this a better place to live. Thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you all for answering these thought-provoking questions in such an insightful and informative manner. I'm so sorry, due to paucity of time, we're able to take only these many questions. I'm sure our audience has benefited from these Q&A sessions. I would now hand it back to Ms. Smriti, ma'am.
Thank you, Ms. Sita. To conclude today's webinar, there's some points that I've jotted down. One is the challenging and changing our consumptive ways is the answer. Empowering the existing human resource available, better involvement of knowledgeable members of society in the process of policy formulation, especially now that we're looking at a digital census. And population, whether large or small, what is more important is accurate and qualified data leading to better manpower planning for better sustainability. But that will be another day. I now invite Principal Euroschool North Campus, Dr. Vandana Gupta, for vote of thanks.
Thank you so much, Smriti. I think it's absolutely an honor to be proposing a vote of thanks on a prestigious virtual platform like this. I think what we witnessed today is an exuberant display of finesse, knowledge, confidence, and collaboration. A galore of proficient speakers took us through a journey of reality. The facts and figures and the data that was presented by the eminent speakers, and it makes us think, you know, has been an eye-opener. It makes us really think the kind of demographic shifts that could happen, the kind of changes the economy could see in future, the kind of changes it could bring in the environment. So we really do need to, as Mr. Luthra said, we really do need to introspect. At this moment, I am reminded of David Attenborough, who says, instead of controlling the environment for the benefit of the population, perhaps it's time we control the population to allow the survival of the environment. I think on that brief note, on behalf of Euro team, I extend my heartfelt gratitude toward our panelists, Mr. Vivek Luthra, Ms. Shami Murgesh, Ms. Abhilipsa Bahinipat, and Ms. Katie Khorifar, who were gracious enough to spare their valuable time for enlightening us with their wisdom. I would like to express my gratitude to Ms. Sudeshna Chatterjee for initiating this platform, Ms. Shruti Arun, and Ms. Jyotsna for their contribution as well. I also thank all the student panelists as for the way they took it through as an eye-opener to many of us present here. As right in the beginning, Ms. Shruti had said that, you know, we don't need just smart speakers, we also need smart thinkers. And the kind of R&D that children have done for this topic is absolutely commendable and amazing. With this note, I would take immense pleasure also to thank the spokes, Ms. Smriti Girotra, Ms. Amanpreet Garg, Ms. Katie Khorifar, and Ms. Divya Prakash, and the support team, Ms. Prima Rego, Ms. Sita Lakshmi, Ms. Catherine Jacob, and Ms. Pia Lawrence to have made this virtual event feasible and impeccable. I would also like to thank Mr. Ashok Rath for his time and support for conducting this event. A special vote of thanks to our parents and students to have gone all the way to make this show a tremendous success, to say the least. So this Population Day, let us work together to ensure a life of security, dignity, and opportunity for all. Thank you so much. Thanks all.